Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's kind of interesting to me because we've done this in a pretty cavalier way. What this committee just did was vote to preempt a state law. There are a whole lot of people here who would talk about the sanctity of the 10th Amendment, talk about states' rights, talk about this incubator that is states' rights, but yet today, without really much of a mention about preemption, we voted to preempt, and I'm one of them. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that we should only do this in the context of something very serious, something that is critical in the exercise of our responsibility under the Interstate Commerce Clause, which is to guarantee that commerce moves across the states in a way that facilitates interstate commerce. And I think that's what we're doing today. We're facilitating interstate commerce. But we're also, in many ways, telling these consumers who have been activists in the grassroots that they don't need to know, that we know better than they do about what kind of information they need to know about what's in their food. That's a tough sell. It's a tough sell in a political environment where people think that this Washington, D.C. doesn't listen to them. So for all of those reasons, all of the reasons in terms of knowing the science and knowing the commitment that we have to American agriculture, knowing that we have to facilitate interstate commerce, that a patchwork of 50 state regulation will not work, it's balanced by some pretty interesting work here, which is a preemption, a 50-state preemption on health and safety of food, whether you agree with it or not, and it's balanced against a right of consumers to know. Now, I will tell you honestly, if we think that this debate is over after we take this vote or after we go onto the floor, it's not over. The argument and the concern that consumers have about the quality and sourcing of their food will continue to build, and the grocery manufacturers will continue to respond to that consumer demand. It won't matter about labeling. This is not an issue of our making. This is an issue that is born out of the grassroots saying, we need to know. And so simply saying a voluntary standard is adequate, I don't know that that's right. I don't know if that really responds in such a way to the concerns that you see being expressed across the country. And in North Dakota, one of the biggest and greatest agricultural states, 90% of the people in polls support mandatory GMO labeling. Now, we can say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. I usually don't say that to the constituents of my state. I usually try and understand what their concerns are and try and figure out how we're going to achieve a result here in terms of sourcing information. So where I don't agree, I agree that this is not a perfect piece of legislation. I think we need to advance it, but we need to put this in the context of what's really going on in America in terms of people's right to know and right to understand what's happening with food. And we need to recognize that we have failed, and we have failed miserably, to explain what this is. We use scientific studies, and all the American public hears is blah, 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 blah. They don't believe it. And so we need to face those realities. We need to be sensitive to those realities as we move forward on this legislation. Because this legislation dealt with a standard that was, in fact, voluntary, I had an amendment that would introduce a voluntary system for country of origin labeling. I've withdrawn that amendment. I look forward to what we can do to help stabilize our beef industry, help respond to our beef industry. I've been working with the chairman. I want to express my appreciation, my gratitude for the work that the chairman and his staff has done and the work that the ranking member has done in advancing this. But I also didn't think we should pass this moment without talking about what really happened here in terms of preemption.